I suppose one simple word from Steven Spielberg's filmography can sum up some of the news from this past weekend, and it's simply this. Ouch. Alright, let's dispense with what's needed to be said at the start of all these videos. I admire Steven Spielberg as a filmmaker and a storyteller. I feel he's done a lot to very much enhance and progress the art of filmmaking into wildly imaginative territory. I mean, I do love the stuff the guy puts out. Look. But needless to say, he's made some interesting commentary, and not the first time he's made this kind of commentary. He, in the past couple of years, has spoken out pretty vehemently about Netflix's role in movie distribution and in the movie industry overall. But with an impending meeting of the Academy governors, of which he is one of the longstanding governors, regarding rule changes for what would qualify as being Academy Award worthy, it's coming more to the forefront than ever, especially this past weekend with some of the comments he made regarding that films that only get a limited theatrical run and are primarily released on streaming services should be up more for Emmys as opposed to Oscars. And I know a whole lot of you out there are probably thinking, like, what's the big deal? Emmys, Oscars, who cares? They're getting, recognition and awards regardless, so what's the big difference? Sure, whatever they decide to do, they'll decide to do, but I feel it is kind of important discerning what constitutes as being a film, what constitutes as being part of the television medium primarily, because I feel the main target for this recent kind of string of commentary is Roma, which I watched, which I enjoyed, and which in no way feels like it would be in the Emmy categories when it comes to what his criteria for Emmy worthiness is, which is essentially TV movie. Roma doesn't play like a TV movie. It plays like a fully engaging cinematic experience that was meant for cinema. And again, that's just my personal 2 cents in here, and he's free to feel how he feels, and I'm not here necessarily to put him down for the way he kind of views the industry or the art form, but just to kind of clarify a few points in that Spielberg may or may not be coming at this from a purely artistic sensibility. He is, after all, a businessman and one of the primary movers and shakers now in Hollywood. And as I was looking a little bit more into Steven Spielberg and Netflix related articles and stories, came across some interesting things that, while, might tickle the conspiracy side of our brains quite a bit, I feel don't play the primary motivator for why he's coming out with this commentary now, or why he's going to be addressing these issues at the next governor's meeting for the Academy. But I will say it is interesting, some pretty interesting coincidental timing, and I'm just going to discuss a little bit of that here with you today. Now, I'm going to link all the articles that I mentioned here in this video log down below, so feel free to check them out for yourself and read up on them and see if maybe, piques your interest a little bit. So of course there is the primary article or primary interview and statement that was released by Spielberg that's been making the rounds this past weekend regarding his thoughts on Netflix or streaming service based films being more eligible for Emmys as opposed to Oscars, and discussing his upcoming talk about changing the eligibility rules for Oscar contenders, even though Roma did play by the Academy's rules and did have a limited theatrical run, which was their quota that they had to meet in order to get eligibility. So even when the movie is playing by the current rules, we're just going to shift that goal line a little bit. Interesting approach. But as I read the article and looked into other articles, like I said, some more interesting articles and stories arose, especially pertaining to Steven Spielberg and a lot of his investments that might be tied to certain movie theater franchises. The first article that I kind of ran across was this one talking about AMC, and it's from last year. AMC Theaters basically backing a $20 million investment that was also being shared by, I believe, Steven Spielberg and Hans Zimmer, VR experiences to be distributed in theaters. I believe they did start those up, these VR storefronts, in December. And this is the company that is being financially backed by these people called Dreamscape Immersive, which the idea is to have specifically designed VR theaters or storefronts, like I said, in the franchise chains that will promote primarily immersive VR movie theater going experiences. I believe one they're kind of touting is called Alien Zoo, and it's essentially something to the effect of like Avatar, except you have free roam of the environments and everything like that, and it's supposed to be this big, almost theme parkish attraction to AMC, and $20 million investment. Now I know for big franchise chains and for a big industry titan like Spielberg himself, that might seem like pocket change, but it's still an investment. I just couldn't help but think about this as I was reading on for some other articles that surfaced, because the Dreamscape Immersive did have, I guess predictably, a very solid opening, I believe in LA, with its first storefront, and they plan to release subsequent ones across the country as time goes on. It got me thinking about movie theater attendance overall, and how I feel that is a very big factor in the commentary on streaming services these days versus the theater going experience, which I feel ultimately does tie into Spielberg's statements about these streaming service films not getting the same kind of prestige or recognition as their in-theater counterparts. Because right before the Oscars, in January, an article was published by Deadline regarding AMC theaters and Regal cinemas barring Roma from being shown in their Best Picture showcase. This was right after Roma had gotten its 10 nominations, and Netflix was open to renting out the film for a limited theatrical release again, for it to be showcased with the other Best Picture nominees such as Bohemian Rhapsody and Black Klansman and so forth. AMC flat out said that they would not be showcasing Roma with the other contenders. Regal kind of hid the lead in their story, but to the same extent was saying that, you know, we're not going to be showing Roma in theaters with the other nominees. And that tickled my interest yet again that they would be doing that, because it really wasn't so much of a rights issue. The fact that Netflix was open and willing to lease out the film essentially for that run to them, and that they would get the returns, it says a lot about the mentality of theater chains these days. And also, I feel that kind of informs a little bit of modern day Steven Spielberg's mentality on streaming services. Because while business might be booming for theaters when it comes to big tentpole movies such as your Avengers or your Star Wars, or any other big franchise blockbusters, it doesn't speak a lot with regards to the success or the longevity of those theater chains when they are primarily relying upon smaller films, or films that take a little bit more creative liberties, such as Roma, such as The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, where there's not a guaranteed audience that's going to be set in to give you the box office you want in the theaters. Why free up a theater for a small indie flick that sure is getting critical praise, but you're not guaranteed packed houses, when you can certainly use that screen to show another showing of Spider-Verse. And again, it's not to take away from the quality of the films that are being shown in vast multiplexes and things like that, because a lot of them are really good. Again, from the business standpoint, it is the smaller, more focused, quieter films that do kind of eat the difference, basically. And Spielberg, to some extent, kind of knows this. Like, especially in recent years with movies like Bridge of Spies and The Post, which sure got a lot of critical praise, but I can't recall them really being the box office like successes that, you know, his earlier, more fantastical endeavors were. Now, you're probably wondering, what does this all have to do with Dreamscape Immersive? Well, to kind of put it this way, if you have fewer and fewer returns at the box office and less traffic actually coming to your theaters, simply because there's more availability for these more prestigious films on streaming services, or people mainly show up for the primary opening weekend of big blockbusters, which in this day and age, granted we've had a couple of good ones that have kept a long-standing, track record in theaters, but then you have, your sleeper hits or your movies that are doing really well but don't get quite the big returns, such as your Bumblebees. Or to even delve into a franchise that I mentioned earlier, Solo. Solo was considered to be the first bomb of the Star Wars franchise, just because it didn't quite make back as much as they were expecting it, they were projecting it to do. And that goes for both the studios and the theaters themselves, who get, a percentage of that take. When you have diminishing traffic at your actual theaters, as well as diminishing returns, how do you feel that's going to impact your mentality on your recently christened VR endeavor that you sank a little bit of money into? But let's face it, VR storefronts and the technology needed to be maintained for these VR experiences, ultimately that's going to be pretty costly in terms of maintenance, I think, in the long run. If you want to keep those experiences going, certainly might be a little bit more costly than your average movie projector. So while the initial investment might not be as grand or as vast as we were thinking it would be, the eventual payoff for all of that investment is still up in the air. And AMC may not be a fan of that. And since they are in sort of a joint business venture here with Mr. Spielberg, there might be a certain amount of corporate synergy taking place with regards to his statements on streaming services and their material. And I'm not saying he's like a shill or anything like that, but he is a businessman now. He's not the maverick kind of visionary filmmaker he was back in the mid-70s when that was a fresh new take. Everything's cyclical. He has become the industry. He and George Lucas and all those filmmakers who kind of challenged what movies were back then are the status quo now, are, like I said, the movers and shakers of the products now. And when you have investment in the future of the technology and the medium, you want to make sure you can get the most out of your investment. It's very much what I would do in the similar situation. It could be quasi the artistic integrity he feels is genuinely at risk, and it could be also that, oh my gosh, I have to kind of protect my investment going on here with AMC, with Hans Zimmer in this VR storefront, or overall just to say like, oh my gosh, I have to kind of protect my investment for my future movies that I want to get wide distribution. And I've heard a lot of people in other commentary and other video logs kind of say like, well, just make better products. And that's easier said than done, because these better products are equally as costly. Sinking a lot of money into a project that can go 50-50, it's still a gamble. And when you gamble, sometimes you want to make sure you have a lot of certainties kind of covered. And one of them could be, let me try to undermine a little bit of this competing platform that might take away from my eventual box office returns. It's not quite this opaque black and white commentary that he's just an old dinosaur stuck in his lane, essentially, or the equivalent of the old man saying, get off my lawn. I don't feel it's that at all. He has supported and nurtured advancements in the field of filmmaking for several years now. It's part of what he's probably thinking of as maintaining or preserving the longevity of the industry. But at the same time, you can't help but think he does have stakes in some future endeavors taking their first baby steps into becoming something big. And so if something like Roma being distributed by Netflix is being perceived as a genuine kind of threat to that, this is probably why he's taking the actions and taking the comments that he is. I feel like half of this is kind of rambling and so forth. Like I said, I'll put the articles up on my description, but I want to leave you with this, which is a clip from one of my favorite documentaries called Corman's World, because I feel it really kind of encapsulates a little bit of maybe the mentality or zeitgeist that's taking place around filmmaking today, and especially around this debate of distribution and competing platforms. There's a point in Corman's World where they do basically allude to the fact that when Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were on the rise with Jaws and Star Wars respectively, how that was ultimately the signaling of the death blow for Roger Corman's industry and the types of movies that he was putting out at drive-ins and, for lower budgets. He is talking essentially about how the expenditure of money on films blowing up to the prices that they were seemed like kind of a waste to him.
The artist should be able to express himself for less money than that, and the businessman should be able to invest his money better. I think from both an artistic and a commercial standpoint, it is wrong to spend that much money. And in addition, I think there are better things to do with the money in our society.
And ultimately, I can't help but feel this is sort of a spiritual, karmic kind of payback on that. I'm not saying that Steven Spielberg's a bad person or anything, or that he totally deserves all this scrutiny or is undeserving and deserving of scrutiny, but certainly it's interesting to kind of see him now be in Roger's role, where there's this new technology or this new kind of way of approaching not just movie making, but movie distribution that is challenging his methodology to an extent, and in a way can be something of a threat to his methodology. I respect the guy's talent. I respect his eye and his ability to craft amazing characters and stories. With regards to this particular topic, either he's just kind of set in a certain way, or there's something more at play with potential investments that he wants to see through to the end, and this is his way of hopefully being able to negotiate the murky waters of Netflix and other streaming platforms. And certainly Netflix isn't completely in the right either. I mean, the fact that they're so shady about their numbers to begin with and releasing those figures is, it doesn't put people at ease who are in still the old school mentality of movie distribution. There's a lot of, I feel, fault and suspicion on either side of this argument, and we'll just have to wait and see what the governors decide to come up with. But for my money, go check out a Spielberg film for yourself on DVD, or, next time it's in the theater, go support Netflix or Amazon releases when they have limited theatrical runs. Certainly show that there is an audience for these types of movies that are willing to come out to put up with a modern day theater going experience to see them. And by all means, check out Roma. It's beautiful. It made me cry in the last third of it. Beautiful film. Movies.